Hello, guys. Thank you for tuning back into the Why the We Have Issues podcast. We have a special guest tonight that we will be interviewing. I am Matt.
I am Carvell.
And I'm Chris.
Awesome. And tonight we have Beth Bourne with us, and she is coming to us out of California, and we are so appreciative to have her here with us tonight. If you recognize the name, it's because she has recently kind of had a viral sensation. Beth went to a school board meeting in Davis, California, and in order to get their attention, disrobed.
Beth, would you like to tell us about a little bit about Moms for Liberty and what they do?
Sure. So Moms for Liberty, it's just a fantastic organization that is looking at protecting parental rights, in all levels of government, and especially what's happening in our public school system. But, the night I was at the school board meeting, I was really speaking as an individual. So I oftentimes will hold public events at our library to bring parents in to talk about the curriculum. But in this instant, I was just really speaking as an individual and just sort of my frustration with the school board not listening to me and listening to my concerns. And so I tried something that I thought would get their attention.
It certainly did. It got our attention.
Right.
So how many times have you appeared before that particular school board? It sounds like you had didn't have a good past experience. They weren't really paying you attention.
That's right. I started speaking out specifically on gender ideology, or the indoctrination of children between kindergarten and 12th grade in our public schools. I'm just so thankful that President Trump had this executive order recently to really expose and hopefully end this indoctrination, or the programming of children to believe that, because of their interests or their hobbies, or just being uncomfortable being around other kids because kids get bullied, that they might be born in the wrong body, this insane idea. So I started speaking out 3 years ago, and it really impacted my family personally. My daughter got swept into it along with many of her other friends that were mathematical and quirky girls who thought they might be boys. So when I started speaking out 3 years ago, almost immediately the school district served me with a restraining order. And so I had to get legal representation from the Dillon law firm. So Harmeet Dillon is now our U.S. Assistant Attorney General for Civil Rights in the Trump administration. But attorneys at her law firm represented me. So I just go back, a couple of years now with wanting to speak out and feeling like the school district is really trying to censor parents like me who are speaking out on an issue. But I still keep going back, every 2 weeks, or at least, almost every meeting I'll show up to the school board and speak for 2 or 3 minutes, depending on how much time we get about this issue, because it's so important to me, and I just feel like children are being harmed by it.
For sure. When we spoke on the phone, Beth, I promised you a good story. So your tactic here kind of resonated with me. When I was in high school, we had a teacher who would take off points and not allow students to go to the bathroom. And this particular teacher was supposed to unlock her floor's bathrooms in between classes, but she never would. And so students would either have to run all the way to the end of the third floor, go down to the second floor, and you can't make it to class on time when you're doing that. So everybody's kind of tired of that. And I got particularly ticked off about it. And there was one day I was like in pain. I had to pee so bad. And so I told her, I was like, look, you got to let me go. And she was giving me a hard time about it. And I finally had enough. And I pissed myself right there in class, all over the chair, the floor, everything. And so that became, oddly enough, is kind of like the Billy Madison thing. It became kind of a legendary thing around the school. But what really played into it was the next day I was absent for some reason. And my girlfriend at the time, the teacher had made some snarky remark about where was I. And my girlfriend at the time told her she thought I'd went to go see a lawyer. And then the school got scared and called my grandparents, and they told them I had a medical issue, which wasn't really a lie, because at the time I was having to go to the doctor to try to figure out a blood sugar issue. Not to say that's what caused the problem, but they didn't know that. So it ignited this whole big thing. I ended up getting letters from the school, almost got the teacher fired. I felt absolutely terrible about that. And for the rest of my high school career, and even now, I'm known as the guy that peed his pants in school. But got to use the bathroom again. So, anyways, that's my
protest works.
Yeah, that's exactly.
It does work.
Yeah. So yeah, sometimes you just have to go to those links. But to follow up on that, I won't cut anybody else off. I won't monopolize the time too much. But my question is, does it seem to be more like the administration of at the school board level, at that higher, managerial class that gives you trouble, or is it the school itself that gives you the most trouble?
That's a really good question the way you asked that. I would say we're in California, and this is a blue city. It's a university town.
Mm-hmm.
University of California, Davis is here. It's 85% Democrats, right? And probably the teachers are closer to 90 or 95%. So most teachers probably think that what I'm saying is not kind and inclusive, and that I'm transphobic or bigoted, for my views. But I'm sure there's, 5 or 10% of the teachers who probably agree with me, but they're afraid to say something. It's coming from both the administrators and our teachers. Our trustees, all 5 of them are far left Democrats, and same with our superintendent. So we don't really have a balance of opinions or thoughts. Everything is voted 5-0, everything, for 3 years. Nobody will have a dissenting view or question something. They've almost, I think they call themselves like the superpower 5 or something. They joke about it, that they all have the same views and they always vote the same way. And so together they look at me as a public enemy number 1 in this town. And it shows up in the way they treat me in these school board meetings.
Myself and Matt, we come from, ostensibly the South, basically. I'm in Kentucky, he's in Arkansas. That idea of these gender ideology radicals, it swings far to the other way over here. Carvell, I know you're in Detroit, but they have kind of that more old school Midwestern feel, so it's not quite that coastal attitude. Just how hard is it for you to find like-minded people to support the positions that you have in the school board? And are you a lone voice in this sea of Democrats, or are you finding others that are kind of getting fed up in there in California?
I've been really fortunate because I did start reaching out to other people. The League of Women Voters here in this town, who I thought would have some conservative people who could maybe support me, or maybe just want to speak out for women's rights, to have safety and fairness in sports, and privacy and dignity in our locker rooms, and safety in our prison system. They were not willing to touch this topic, right? There's this whole group of women that are progressive Democrat types in San Francisco. Many of them are lesbian, bisexual, and they really understand this as an issue where we're harming kids who could grow up to be healthy gay adults. So they speak out on this issue, and more as a feminist. So I have these Democrats, and then I have these conservative, more Christian, older Republican women. And, and so I have and then all these men in town who really do see how unfair it is to their daughters, around the sports issue. Mm-hmm. So it's bringing together different groups of people that have never worked together before on a topic, right? You have, Christian conservative, and then I have my liberal, women feminists, radical feminist people. And then, I have some friends that are scientists at the university who support me, who are atheists. So I've just found support in lots of different groups, but it took me a while, for a good 6 months, I think I felt pretty alone. And then once people got to know what I was doing in town, people would reach out to me, in private little messages saying, I hear what you're doing. I totally support you. Oftentimes, though, they're worried about their job, either at the university, or they're worried about relationships with their children and grandchildren because they have super liberal kids, or they're just worried about their neighbors or friend groups finding out and then being socially ostracized. So it's a real cancel culture in this town if you have a view that's not in line with the supermajority far left in this town.
Carvell, we could be talking about lawn care equipment and he turned it into a trans issue. So, you got questions, man?
I got questions. So what do you think affected your activism? Is it more so your personal life, and then you wanted to make steps forward to kind of change what you see broadly? Or is it something that you've seen as far as this transgender movement that you decided to step up? Like, what influenced it more? Was it your family or what you perceived happening on the outside and how culture was changing?
Initially it was what was happening in my family personally. So my daughter, she was taught that she could become a trans boy. And I did not realize that it was in her curriculum, in her health and science class, because it got introduced in 2018 here in California public schools. So she was like the first cohort of kids to be told, hey, you might be transgender if you X, Y, Z. And there were, huge clusters in her theater group and her choir. And she's, gifted, National Merit Scholar, very intelligent. So these kids oftentimes get captured by this. And so I was speaking more as an individual in the beginning, like, this happened to my family. I know girls in this town are having double mastectomies. They're having top surgery, elective top surgery while they're still 14, 15 years old. Because I can see these girls, I can see them when I go to their theater production, or I can just look on their social media or see them, I'm not like spying on them, but they share it on their social media, right? That they've lost their breast.
Which is something the Democrats are saying doesn't happen, by the way.
I know. It's like, all you have to do is you just can Google Kaiser Permanente top surgery California minors, and you can look at the numbers. It's like 75 girls back in 2019 had top surgery. And the girls are right here in Davis. I mean, it was offered to my child. So, of course, it's happening. And I'm very close to one of the women here in California. She just lives an hour away, who Kaiser had her breast removed when she was 13. And she regretted it by the time she was 15. So it's real. It's happening. But, like Carvell asked, I didn't realize, though, that whole queer theory and identity politics, it's so much bigger than just what's happening in our school system. It's really like a cultural idea that we've tried to instill across every part of our lives. But it really did come first.
Following.
Yeah. But it's so personal to me that it's what gives me the motivation to spend, almost all my free time, if I'm not with my son or exercising, this is what I work on, because I don't want to see more kids harmed by it, or young adults, or any vulnerable person who thinks they're depressed and they're anxious and they don't like something about themselves. It's given to them as like this, super magic pill or cure where they can become a whole new person with just hormones and surgeries, and you can reinvent yourself. It's so alluring.
Yeah. I think it's more something that has been pushed on young people. Is this something that is more the influence of social media, or would you say this has kind of been more fabricated because of the situation young people are finding themselves in? There is social media that makes them self-conscious. They're getting out of school without strong job prospects. Many can't afford college. There's abuse going on at home. So is this something more pushed on them by culture, or is this something that culture itself is just kind of naturally let happen?
I think my child and, her group of girls and boys, they're like the first kids who not only did they have access to social media, they're the first kids to have iPhones. They started carrying iPhones when they were third, fourth grade. My kid got introduced to a lot of this through Reddit and Tumblr, which I didn't know how much of this stuff is happening in those kinds of areas. But then at the same time, I didn't know the library books that were being brought into the schools. And I didn't know that teachers were allowed to talk to kids about their gender identity and change their name on the roll call, change their pronouns. They're allowed to let girls use the boys' bathroom. And this is all done without any parent permission or parental notification. So I think it's a combination, the social media being introduced through television, and the show Jazz Jennings was on television around this time. and then also in the school. So it's just a combination of all, the perfect storm, right? It all came together at the same time. And my child was one of the first, and also the surgeries and the hormones were brought in around this time, where Kaiser was now offering these surgeries to children, starting at 12 years old. You could have top surgery, and you could get on puberty blockers and hormones, in 2 appointments. I mean, it's just insane. And it all was around the same time, 2017, 2018.
What do you think? How did we get here as a society? How did we get to the point where this transgender movement is becoming something where it's being, in a sense, probably to you and your children in the school system, it's being forced upon them to let them know that, hey, culturally, this is okay. What do you think? How did we get here? I remember a time where this was something that was not only taboo, but looked down upon. How did we get here?
Well, and Carvell, I'm sorry to hijack real quick, but I came from the Deep South. I graduated from high school in Louisiana, and we did have a trans student when I was there. I graduated in 07, so this is probably 04 or 05. We had an actual trans student. I did not know. Somebody had to tell me. That's how good they passed. And it was just like, oh, that's cool. And that was nobody cared. But then fast forward to now, like you're saying, Carvell, I have a niece who's going through this right now. And it was 14 with your daughter, correct, Beth?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so it's about 14 with my niece too. And it's like it has consumed her entire life. It affects everything. It's like it's simultaneously the best thing that's ever happened to her and the worst thing that's ever happened to her. And she's just, she's so confused.
Yeah, and that's true. There were a lot of trans people, growing up. Like I remember seeing a trans person walking through the mall when I was 16 years old. I guess more so I'm looking at the culture aspect, right? Where did we get to the point where not only was transgender accepted, but it was being pushed into our community as something that we can strive to be or strive to have in our culture. Like, for an example, when I think about, let's say, Thailand, right? Thailand is infamous for having transgenders. And a lot of that came from the war and how maybe U.S. soldiers would tour around in Asia, particularly Thailand. And the stories that I've heard that the only way you could make money is through prostitution. And not saying that this is the exact cause, but the research that I've seen and heard that culturally it became accepted because it was a way of making money, and it's ingrained into the culture right now in Thailand. Now, I'm curious, in your opinion, culturally, how did we get here?
There's some real experts on this research, but what I would say from what I've kind of noticed, because I also did hear about these transsexuals and these cross-dressers when I was growing up, and they were predominantly men who either got aroused dressing as women or, for some reason, these middle-aged men enjoy dressing up as women. I don't know if you know Bruce Jenner's story, Caitlyn Jenner. He talks about, being aroused when he would put on his daughter's, she was 10 years old at the time. When he would wear his daughter's underwear, he'd get turned on. And he said that, right, in an interview. And so then, he kills somebody on the Pacific Coast Highway in Malibu. And soon after that tragedy, he comes out as a woman, trans woman a few weeks later. That was probably what most of us would think of if we thought of a transsexual or transgender. And then with queer theory and how it was being talked about in academia was this idea that, anyone could be transgender, could be even young people, even children could believe they're transgender. And so all of a sudden we had this group of people, and this would be mothers, right? I saw this in my own town where a mother said, hey, my 2-year-old son is actually a trans girl. And I know this because this boy likes wearing, ballet dresses, likes wearing his hair long. It's actually my daughter. I'm going to change her name. And when this happened, I was like so shocked. This was 2010. I thought, how can this mother be so convinced that her son is her daughter? And, I kind of pushed back with some friends and I realized nobody wants to talk about it. So I let it go. And then I started seeing more and more kids here in Davis, young 5, 6, 7-year-olds being introduced in school as being transgender. So I think it kind of came through, I believe, men who liked, Rachel Levine, right? Richard Levine, who was our administrator for
Secretary, yep.
yeah. So, he's another man who had children and then decided, in his 50s that he'd rather live as a woman. But the way you can justify men becoming trans women is by saying there's actually children that are also trans. And so they created this whole mythical idea of the transgender child. And it came through the Human Rights Campaign, who was predominantly looking at gay, lesbian, bisexual rights and gay rights marriage. When that passed really quickly, I'm not sure what year it was, 2012 or,
Yeah.
When that passed, they had all this organization in place and all this power structure. And so they needed to pivot, right? Because we already have every state in America said, we can have gay marriage rights. And so they just said, okay, now we need to focus on transgender rights. Mm-hmm. And transgender people, which are men, pretending to be women or women pretending to be men, they have all the rights, right? They have housing, they have employment, they have all the rights. They already have them. But what they want is they want to take away women's rights. They want to take away the right for us to have our own spaces or our own sports. But we were told, no, women, your rights aren't as important as these trans rights. So the whole thing is a mess. And I think what bothers me so much is we're using children to validate the feelings of these delusional men, right? And we're also telling young women who hate being women, who don't feel safe being women because they've been assaulted or whatever's happened in their life, or they're unattractive women, that, hey, you can become a man, which you can't. So, it's a really dark topic if you look into it. And, here in California, the tech industry was really pushing it too. So Intel, Oracle, all these companies were, paying for their engineers and their programmers to have these trans treatments done. And so I've just been noticing that here in the Silicon Valley, all these gifted, quirky men are now coming out as trans women. And I don't know if it's from watching porn or from, being online and playing these video games where they get to be a female avatar, or from anime or what it is, or they just don't fit in as men. I'm just worried, though, how much it hurts kids and women, really.
I'm more focused on the God aspect of it. And this is kind of something that, Chris and Matt, they know my opinion. I talk about it almost every episode. So, but it's definitely something that God did not intend to be, right? God did not intend for male to try to act like females to try to act like males, to wear dress, high heels. And I mean, I've done that for Halloween. And when I was in high school,
I'm going to need that picture, Carvell. That's going to be the next thumbnail. No.
It's going to be like a picture online, say, hey, really, Carvell? Boom. But the truth be told, and stuff, I gave this story to Chris and Matt that I was in Planet Fitness and sometimes I take showers at the gym, and there were a couple of people that were looking at me. And I didn't quite understand why they were looking at me, but I had my towel on. And then when I walked past them, I found out, oh, those are actually two females, And I was like, wow, this is crazy. I never thought I'd see the day where, because I'm myself being in the men's bathroom and telling them they're not allowed to be there, or vice versa, right? Makes them uncomfortable. And I have to make them comfortable in my uncomfort. And, obviously women have to deal with that more, and that's just something that you don't quite understand, how people are not seeing through the deception.
It's such a fantastic example of that uncomfortable feeling you have when you're showering or doing something, private in front of the opposite sex. It's uncomfortable. And Planet Fitness just opened up here in Davis, and I know that's their policy. It's to allow people to self-identify by their gender identity into whichever locker room they want.
Man, I'm just trans. I guess that'd be trans men.
Yeah.
You're gonna see some stuff in there. You're gonna see some stuff you don't want to see. I can promise.
Right.
For me, with that sort of stuff, that self-identity and things like that, that gets a little bit different as people become adults. Not always, because especially for women, to have men intrude on women's spaces, I know that's a lot more discomfort than a woman coming into a man's space, biologically that is. Because I know I wouldn't be bothered by it personally, but I'm a big guy. Like, I can take care of myself. These policies that happen in places like California are just completely bizarre to me. It's self-identity, right? So they don't even need to be on hormones or anything like that. And it's queer theory, right? Like gender fluid, like you can be a guy one week and a girl just so I can hop into the women's restroom. And I know this is happening more and more in prisons too, where inmates, as soon as they're arrested, by the way, I'm trans, so I need to go to a women's prison. And the state of California is more than happy to send them there. I think the media too is at fault with this because they downplay so many of these stories of abuse by trans individuals because they don't want the narrative to be muddled. They don't want to realize that, there are trans people who, they just live their lives. They just want to be left alone. They just want to exist as they feel when they're not hurting anybody. But there's also a segment that goes out there specifically to abuse or harm or groom or do these things. And I find that they're not being policed by us, by everyone, or by the trans community itself. And I think that's really where a lot of this problem is that you have these progressives and these trans rights activists and these transgender individuals that are afraid to stand up and pump the brakes. And I think that's where Moms for Liberty is doing huge work, to kind of, hey, someone needs to be an adult in the room. Might as well be a mom.
Well, and what's a shame about that though is, Chris, so my wife spends more time on TikTok and stuff like that than I do, but there are influencers out there who identify as trans who address this, but you didn't mention them, and I don't know them by name. Carvell can't mention them by name. I'm sure, Beth, I don't know if you can. My point is, we don't know who these people are. They're not getting that major television time to talk about this, to give their side of the story. Like you're saying, Chris, the community itself isn't doing its own police work. And you've got unfortunately, I hate to say it this way, but it's the worst examples that are out there leading the trans community, leading the trans kids. And that's just a terrible example to be set.
And God help you if you're a detransitioner voice.
Oh,
because not only are you not given any platform, you are actively shut down.
So I know more of the detransitioners than I know, like the ones I'm just saying, the ones that speak, I guess, speak on behalf of the positive side of the community. I know more of the detransitioners, but that's because they get their videos recirculated and shared by trans people attacking them.
I take a more of a very conservative role when it comes to this. In 1 Corinthians 15:33 reads, "Do not be misled. Bad company corrupts good character," right? I think it's more of a culture thing, right? The reason why I say it's a cultural thing, when we see one trans, we see two trans, when we see three trans, it becomes accepted. People, human nature, we tend to be bad people. That's just who we are. There's good people and there's bad people. There's good gays, there's bad gays. There's good trans, there's bad trans. That's just human nature. But I think sometimes, and I know that you guys might disagree with me, but just the whole presentation of transgenders lets us know culturally that it's acceptable. I mean, it's undeniable that over time that culture has changed a lot. I remember, back in the day, 20, 25, 30 years ago, when your parent gives you a spanking, nobody said anything, Now, if you do it now, CPS can get called on you. So we're entering a culture now where it's saying that, hey, let everybody be who they are and do not give them any punishment. They're okay the way they are. But what we don't understand is that and I'm not saying, it sounds like I'm saying punish transgenders. It's not what I'm saying. But what I'm saying culturally, we have to draw a line and we have to get on the same page as if we're going to accept this or not. And the reason why we got to define this is because it's going to change our outlook 20 years later. No matter how we want to look at it, no matter how much we fight for equality or, non-equality, it's either we accept it or we don't accept it, because this will be ingrained in our culture years to come. Just going back to where I was saying that a lot of us will get spankings. We've seen how culture changes till today, where kids are rude now. Kids talk back to their parents. Kids are, kind of have all the freedom they want because parents are not as strict anymore. This is a cause of us not making a stance on where we ought to be and doing things like Beth does, in a more of extreme way to get her point across, that say, hey, you guys, this is what it's doing to our culture. We have to stop it now. Right. And if we don't stop it now, 20 years later, we're going to be somewhere we don't want to be. And more importantly, we're going to be more distant from God.
Well, I would actually be scared of what is coming down the pipeline when all these detransitioners, what happens when they all do start to converge? What happens with the next generation when you have these people who are extremely angry and pissed off that somebody let them do these extreme modifications to the body? And that's something I've respected about Beth's story is, to me, she supported her daughter very well. I think you handled that really well, Beth. And I like that you got her all the support that you thought was necessary, but you never allowed her. You had that stipulation. You can't medically transition. Yep. And was it a lack of research, or was it the research that made you kind of put a stop to that?
I think I'm fortunate, and this is what I want to remind everybody too, is you can think critically and you can go with that gut feeling, right? Like, it's okay if you question something and you think, gosh, that doesn't sound right to me. Even if someone's going to tell you, oh, you're being transphobic, or why would you question the doctors? And the reason you can question things is because we know from the past that there have been terrible things that have happened, in society, because people were afraid to speak out. They were afraid to ask questions. And so, I always bring up the example of medical scandals that have happened in the past, where my mother was told she should use formula and not breastfeed, my 3 older brothers, because formula was better, or you should smoke cigarettes because cigarettes are good for your lungs, or you should, why don't we do lobotomies for women that are anxious and depressed because it'll help them with it, a little ice pick to the brain, or why don't we give opioids, or, these serious addictive drugs to people, and big pharma's making money off of it. Like, we have medical scandals in the past. People lie to make money. And why would we not question when my child goes to her Kaiser doctor, and at the first appointment, the Kaiser doctor says, hey, we can send her to this gender clinic and she can get on puberty blockers and testosterone, and it's a one-stop shop. And then, she can talk to the endocrinologist. Like, this is a path you can go. And if, you're a good parent and you're affirming, this is the way you're going to go. And I just asked questions, right? Why would we want to tell a child who's in a perfect body that you can do these things that are going to harm your body, right? You're going to take a healthy, perfect body and actually put experimental drugs into her body and cause her. They said, well, if you just put her eggs into this fertility bank, it doesn't matter if she becomes sterilized, because 20 years down the road, she can use IVF to have a baby. And that's no big deal. If she has top surgery, it's no big deal. You could always have breast reconstruction. I mean, it's so insane. And so parents really need to say, and I was lucky, right? I just was skeptical, or I didn't trust medicine, and I think that was an old value that we used to have, where you don't trust big pharma, or you don't trust giving your kid a bunch of vaccines.
That used to be a fairly liberal
yes,
value.
exactly. It was. I mean, all my friends were feeding their kids organic food when we all had babies together, right? They all gave them organic milk and, organic fruits and vegetables. And so I said to my liberal progressive friends, hey, I don't want to give my daughter cross-sex hormones because I don't think it's safe. And they looked at me like I was this evil person to not trust the gender-affirming care. And I was like, but I'd be giving her a hormone that's meant for males, right? If I give my daughter testosterone, that can't be healthy for her body. And they just didn't understand why I was so opposed to it. And so I think this is the biggest medical scandal of modern times. It just is. And I'm just glad you guys are able to have a conversation about it, because most people will not talk about it. It's a really tough topic.
Beth, your experience was you were able to say no to all of this gender affirming care. Recently, there's been a lot of legislation in states like Washington, Colorado, California, where that is now going to be considered child abuse in these states. And that's something that could get your child taken away from you, and you might not even be aware of it because the schools can't tell you that your child is thinking of transitioning. So if your kid doesn't talk to you, you could lose your child without having done anything. And the state seems to think that that's okay. Is Moms for Liberty advocating to repeal these laws or to propose new legislation in states to protect parental rights?
Yeah, so, I was involved in a lawsuit or a custody case with my ex-husband around my daughter. So I did have attorneys representing me. And it is so much harder for divorced parents because in California, it only takes one parent to change your daughter's birth certificate. And it only takes one parent to, if they get full custody, legal and physical custody, to do this medical stuff. But I was fortunate, we came to an agreement. So you're right, it's a huge deal. And in fact, kids can say, I want to be, what's the word? When you're 16 years old, emancipated. Right. Or they tell CPS, hey, my parents aren't affirming, they won't let me wear my breast binder. They misgender me. I'd like to go move into the foster care system. And that's a huge moneymaker for California, right? It's like $200,000 a year per child in foster care. So let's throw all these kids into foster care. And, once these kids become dependent on the government or the state to take care of their housing and their food, and then they've got them, right? You've broken up the family unit. The kids don't trust their parents, and only the government's providing for them.
It's state-sponsored human trafficking.
Yeah, it really is.
Good way to put it, yeah.
I'm lucky because there's a lot of international parents in Davis. So I have families that are from China or Venezuela or Russian who come up to me and they say, this is exactly what happened in China, communism coming in and breaking up families and kids reporting their parents, the breaking up of the family unit. I think what Carvell is saying with God and, our families and needing to protect our children. Why is this good for society to tell children, girls, you can become a boy, or boys, you could become a girl, or you might be non-binary and you might not be a boy or a girl. And, you don't need to worry about your reproduction or, becoming a parent one day. You don't need to worry about having a loving relationship with your parents or your grandparents. It's, how does this benefit society? All of it is just so dark.
Well, I think you touched on that, Beth. I think you answered your own question when you said it's like a $200,000 a year child industry.
Yeah.
I mean, the family's not getting enriched. The child is not getting enriched. The LGBT community is not getting enriched by this, but somebody's pocketbooks are. So.
And that's a really cynical way to look at it. But I mean, the evidence is there. How much money does one transgender individual spend over the course of their lifetime on medical treatments?
Oh, it's going to be medical care for the extended.
Yeah, boy, I know these numbers. If you take a boy, he wants to become a woman, it's $60,000 for the feminization surgery, right? The forehead and the jawline. It's another $20,000 to have his testicles removed. It's another, $100,000 to have a vaginoplasty, slice his penis, make it into an open wound. If he wants to have electrolysis, have his skin removed, how expensive that is. He wants to have a trachea shaved of his Adam apple. There's this long list of things you need to do, and there are multiple surgeries. And breast augmentation, of course, right? There are multiple surgeries. There's complications. If you're on estrogen, you're going to have all these different impacts. So somewhere between 800,000 to $1.5 million, right? This healthy body, this healthy boy is going to be spending to become a trans woman or a woman, who I guess
I get it confused too. I can't keep up with it.
Yeah, exactly. but why not just? It just doesn't make any sense that we would want to line these surgeons and these pharmaceutical companies with our money to make this young man who's unhappy with himself because maybe he's effeminate, or he's not great at sports, or he's not super traditional masculine. There should be a place for boys or men who, whatever, they like makeup.
I think what's insane is we have come to a conclusion as a Western society that it is the body that needs to change. Yeah. And it is so offensive to consider changing the mind. We have a mental health crisis in everyone. Anxiety, depression, all these sorts of things. And we're told, go to therapy, talk it out. But if somebody's trans, immediately, any kind of psychiatric care that is anything less than affirming. We touched on this a little bit with the conversion therapy a couple of episodes ago, where you don't have this alternative psychiatry that may or may not. I've read studies where a lot of these boys that might consider transitioning just end up, when it's paused for a little bit and pushed back, they eventually just come out that they're gay men.
Right. And many of them are autistic too. I have to say, at least what I'm seeing, anecdotally or through my friends, at least 3/4 of these young people, they're autistic, right? They're incredibly gifted and just they're just quirky, and they get teased for being a different kind of boy. Or
isn't that weird though? Because your daughter's super intelligent. If I remember correctly, your husband was an engineer.
Yeah.
And it seems to be very pervasive in these high performing, super intelligent individuals. It's so weird to me that the kids that have that level of intelligence, have that very scientific mind, buy into this. It's very odd.
Well, I think they're also black and white thinkers, and so they like to research. They like to find things online. It becomes a special interest for them, and they dive into it. And the American Pediatric Academy, or the American Psychology, the APA, the Endocrinologist Society, all these different big medical groups, they have a small minority, but a powerful minority on these boards who are making these statements or decisions saying, we all believe this is, gender affirming, life-saving care. So the doctors who don't want to go along with it are afraid. But, for a child who's autistic, they read it online that, hey, the American Psychological Association says transgender care is good. They're going to believe it, right? And they want to believe it. They want to believe there's a reason they don't always fit in, or that they can become a new person.
You bring up the APA and all those other organizations. Just recently, one of the British medical associations, I think they're pediatrics, recently said they're not doing transitioning therapies for minors anymore because they have found that it is harmful to them. And over here in America, that idea has been really attacked, and it's almost like a civil war going on now with the medical communities across the pond. And I just find that incredibly interesting, because these are the sorts of people that claim that they are free thinkers, that they are science-minded, and they seem to have taken on this transgender religion almost. Made that their identity.
Yeah. Well, we're lucky in California because we are seeing the collapse of the pediatric gender clinic. So Stanford University, they just shut down all their gender clinic for kids. Children's Hospital in Los Angeles just shut down completely. Kaiser Permanente will not do any surgeries on anyone under 19. They'll still do the blockers and the hormones. But, we've also heard that to get their malpractice insurance, the premiums have gotten so high that's the reason why a lot of these clinics are shutting down and surgeons. The detransitioner lawsuits are making a difference. And I was involved with the Federal Trade Commission. They did a workshop in July. So I went to Washington, D.C., and I gave testimony about my daughter and her experience at Kaiser. We have the Department of Justice, Pam Bondi, and our Federal Trade Commission, Andrew Ferguson, together. They are filing these lawsuits against all these gender clinics across the country. So we're going to shut it down in blue states as well as the 26 red states that have already said no gender medicine for kids. And Puerto Rico just came out. I didn't realize there's a Republican governor in Puerto Rico, and they came out with no gender-affirming treatments, no maiming or surgical interventions or hormones or blockers for anyone under 21 in Puerto Rico. So that was like 2 months ago.
Something I would like to point out, since you brought up the blockers, the hormone therapy. I used to go to the gym. I was a big gym rat. I can't tell it now, but at one time I was quite big. I kind of looked like the Tasmanian devil. I kind of did that. So when I was in the gym, we used to take these things called, and I only did like one. I think I only did 1 or 2 cycles of it. It's called pro hormones. It was kind of like the workaround for steroids. It wasn't steroids, but once you took it and it processed, it was. And so basically synthetic testosterone. And when we would take this, you'd have to have liver support, all these kinds of things. It got you big, it got you strong, but you felt like hell. You hurt. Your joints hurt so freaking bad. Certain things stopped working until you got off that cycle and your testosterone kicked back on the way it was supposed to do. And it was terrible. And eventually, I think it was in 2014, they banned pro hormones, and I think they have started to resell them now, and they got rid of the ban. I'm not quite sure about that. But anyways, point is, this is something you could go to GNC and get off the shelf, and similar probably to what a hormone blocker and all this, hormone therapy would be. And this is something you could go get. And I was taking this stuff in my 20s and felt these effects. I can't imagine a medical industry grade product pumping that into a kid that probably has 5 times the potency of what I was taking. I mean, kids, I'm telling you, what I felt just taking that junk, you do not want what that hospital's giving you.
And Matt, they tell people that those effects are reversible.
Well,
like you go on the no, we're just pausing their puberty. If they change their mind later, then we'll just let it run its course. There is no way in hell it works like that. No way. When you start it, you're in it. And and that's dangerous.
And kids are losing their IQ points, right? Because of course, if you stop a kid's brain development, even if you're just pausing it, which of course you can't do, you're losing your healthy bone growth and you're losing your brain development. And what child can consent to losing IQ points, right? That is just crazy. It's all the most crazy medicine.
Yeah.
So.
I think one of the things, though, and this is the thing that's always brought up as the last line of defense to defend this idea is, would you rather have a new son or daughter or a dead kid? And it's like,
you're putting parents in a hostage situation.
You are.
A living daughter or a dead son, or whatever. A living son or a dead daughter. It's like, you ask me that question and then I have to decide, wait, I either have to sterilize my child or I might risk them dying. I mean, that is so manipulative of a parent to have a doctor say that.
And it's not even they'll die from their condition. It's that they're going to take their own life. But why? Why couldn't you just support these individuals emotionally so that isn't an option? I get it back in the day when, this was so much less known and there weren't
support group.
There weren't these support groups. Like you might be the only person in your city that felt like they were born in the wrong body and might hate yourself. But we have the internet now. They're talking to each other. They're doing more than affirming each other. They are recruiting almost now.
Exactly. And your child will get celebrated if they come out.
Yeah, especially
you be the coolest kid in school because you're the hero.
Right. Oh, yeah, it's that victim Olympics mentality that we've talked about before.
It's like affirming wrong, it's like, yeah, good job, you did some wrong, good job. It's like, when we were kids, right, we would go out and do something and all of our friends would be like, man, you did it, high five. But it was something wrong, and stuff. And that's kind of what's happening right now. It's really difficult to guess how the party would speak out and collectively speak out about, this particular topic. But if I could guess, I would say that the party does support family, as we mentioned. We do support more of a family function, more of a Christian ideology, but we understand the outside elements, and we will allow people to live their life as long as it doesn't infringe on our values and our rights and our children.
Well, if you remember, Carvell, in the convention, I think it was Ruzon had put forth the change to the platform, not to make it trans inclusive, but basically to put a particular statement in there to say that we didn't harbor any ill will towards trans individuals. And I was completely against that. There was no way I was going to, I didn't even attach my name to it, because it's not enough. It ought to go without saying, just off of what our platform is, being a Christian Democrat Party, that we don't have ill will toward anybody. I just felt like that was kind of a concession that we were doing. So that being said, yes, Beth, we love everybody. We want the best for everybody and everybody to have equal rights. But at the same time, we're not going to endorse something like that.
I'm going to tackle this a little bit differently than you guys. I'm going to look at distributionism, the idea that any policy is best done at the lowest level it possibly can be done. And when it comes to family issues, the best unit to take care of that is the family. It is not the federal government. It is not the state government. It is not a school district. It is the household. It is the family, the mother, the father, either or, blended families, doesn't matter, as long as you are together in that household and caring for each other. And I think that they would encourage more policies that put more responsibility into the hands of the family, more authority into the hands of the family. There are some really shitty families out there, and there are some kids that are 100% in abusive situations. But in that case, it's the next level up, because again, it's the lowest level possible. The state cannot just come in and take your kid because you had a fight. Also, that comes with a responsibility that parents have, that they need to talk to their children. They need to know what their children are getting into, understand where they're going. And kids have the responsibility to reach out to their parents. We love our children. They need to know that. They need to feel comfortable coming to us. And we need to make policies that, make that more known. I feel like in a lot of these school districts, they almost want to pit the students against their parents, because the teachers want to take on a surrogate parent role, and and that's dangerous, and that should be discouraged. And there should be, principals and superintendents need to put their foot down and stop that. They're there to act as us in our absence. They are not there to be us.
Chris, let me ask you this, just out of your curiosity. Just picking your brain a little bit. So in the family structure, everything should happen in the family structure, right? However, we do see in society that people who are popular have a lot of weight in the way individuals think. For an example, let's say people like Taylor Swift or Eminem or Kanye West, whoever it may be, that is popular, that can sometimes override or supersede the value that parents have taught. How would you incorporate that into what you're just saying about keeping it at the level of the family, if individuals can be influenced in such a way that supersedes the values that were taught by their family?
Hopefully you would know what your kids are, who your kids are listening to. I know that's not always the case. You can't read their mind. Kids are always going to want to keep things private from you. But teachers, these other adult figures, scoutmaster, whoever, a coach, they should be able to come to the parent and say, hey, you need to talk to your kid. And in a lot of cases, there's policies that prevent that from happening. If a kid tells a teacher that they're trans or whatever, that teacher can't, in a lot of cases, it's against school board policy for them to even hint at the parent that this is going on. We need to attack those policies and keep that line of communication open. Again, you're an adult, play it by ear, make sure that it's not an abusive situation, but we should never assume that that's the case. We should always give the benefit of the doubt to the family, and I think that's the party's policy, and I think that's where the focus needs to be. And I don't think either the Democrats or the Republicans or any other party has that focus. I think they all want to dictate from on high down through the states, through the counties, wherever. And we can't be doing that. We gotta bottom up. We're the people. We're a democracy. This is where we need to be. And this is an issue that's definitely worth fighting for and worth standing up for, in my opinion.
So thank you so much for tuning in. Hope you enjoyed it. Thank you so much, Beth, for joining us. I just want to say how much that we appreciate the work you're doing, how much we would love to support you any way that we can. Of course, people look up Beth, look up her videos. You have social media links that we can put in the description so that you can follow her and, lend your support to her. I'm Matt.
I'm Carvell.
And I'm Chris.
And that's Beth. Thank you for joining us for the Why Podcast.